trusting strangers and letting people into our lives and what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, it's not normal that an athlete or an artist or somebody who's performing at work just invites strangers in and like, come and shadow me or come and hang out. But it was also cool.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. All right, welcome back, folks, and thanks for tuning in this week. Really excited to bring you this conversation with some dear old friends, Scott and Jenny Jurek. Scott is a legend in ultra running and arguably one of the most accomplished runners of all time. He and Jenny have been important friends to me for a very long time. I first met Scott in the midst of his amazing streak of 7 Western States 100 championships, and I've seen him experience the highest of highs and lowest of lows along many of life's dimensions. Scott and Jenny's amazing book, North, Finding My Way While Running the Appalachian Trail, is a powerful narrative account of their incredible and record-setting experience along the AT in 2015. The book was recently released in paperback, and it's been a tremendous success for good reason. It was an honor to catch up with these two, and fair warning, this interview gets a bit personal. North documents struggles Jenny and Scott had starting a family, similar obstacles that Scott and Jenny watched me and Maggie endure a few years earlier when we were trying to start a family of our own. Running with Scott was a deeply important part of my life during that challenging time, and rereading North to prepare for this conversation brought back all those memories and then some. The book is about so much more than running. It's about relationships, communication, hope, despair, and a lot of other things too. We talk all about it, and I'm excited to bring you the conversation right now. All right, so we're here today with Scott Jurek, Jenny Jurek. Scott and Jenny, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Padre.
It's great to be here.
Padre, now we're sort of using the Wayback Machine, which might be a lot of what this conversation is about, because, you know, we go back quite a long way. Scott, trying to remember our first run together. I think it might have been on, God, what's that mountain between Cougar Mountain and Tiger Mountain?
Squawk.
No, Squawk. Gosh, the Seattle contingent is gonna kill us for that.
I know.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
But anyway,
and it wasn't a SRC run. Okay, I thought maybe we had done something prior to that, like on the roads, but I knew it was like one of those two things, either an SRC run and maybe it was Squawk.
Maybe something like that. I mean, I was a newbie to Seattle, and you went on one of those Sunday trail runs at Seattle Running Company, and I think it was like you and Brandon and Uli Steidel and Scott McCubry, and this was like my intro to trail running, and then I go and totally geek out. I pick up a copy of Trail Runner magazine, and like all of you guys are in the magazine. Like, holy smokes, this is a kind of a neat sport. You can just go meet these superstars right on the trail.
Yeah, and it was probably unique during that time. Like, there was a group of us, and that's what made those years so great. Is you've had these individuals like Uli and Brandon, and we all kind of came together and would go on these fun low-key runs, and we trained a lot together. We all did different things. Uli was training for marathons, and Brandon and I were doing ultras. Yeah, it was good. I mean, I think it brought the community together. Scott had a great vibe at the store. It was kind of the connecting point, and people always felt welcome, and I think that was something that he really wanted to instill with having the store.
And that seems to be, and Jenny, you were kind of in and out of that crew. I remember at the time you were maybe working at Montreal in its formative years, and getting into running yourself, right?
I definitely was. I would go to the store runs, and I remember meeting all you guys. And I remember Scott working at the counter, and I was telling him that I ran my first half marathon, and he was like so proud of me and so pumped. And even though he was a superstar, there were all these people in the store that were like big in the ultra running community. I had no idea. You know, they all treated me like I was a rock star too. So it was such a cool vibe that, you know, it was so welcoming, and I really missed that.
Yeah, I remember, I think, Scott, I went down to the Miwok 100K one year where you were kind of sort of using it as one of your key tune-ups for the Western States. And, you know, you won the race, but like you couldn't even I wasn't even allowed to ask. Well, it wasn't that I wasn't allowed. Like, you didn't even sort of let me get a question in about your experience. You were so interested in asking me about my experience in the race. And I remember sort of, I was so destroyed and like, I got to go lay down. And you were at the finish line just cheering on every single finisher to the end of the day. That was pretty inspiring.
Oh, thanks. I mean, that's kind of how I always felt and saw the ultra running community, and having guys like Uli who are super fast on the roads and still want to hang out with us slower ultra runners, and myself feeling like, oh, here's this guy who's been on world mountain running championship teams. And he'd go out and do 20, 30, 40 mile runs. And yeah, there was like kind of an extension of that community throughout the whole ultra scene, but then also in Seattle in the Northwest. So it's kind of like what I just always felt like that's what I knew as a community way back when I started ultra running back in northern Minnesota. People were always welcoming, people would hang out, and I just felt like, oh, this is what people do. This is our group, and we're kind of like a big family in a way.
Right. And you've been sort of a leader in that family for so many years, and an inspiration to many people on a variety of dimensions. And we'll get into some of that today. But wanted to really kind of talk about a couple milestones. Your book that you wrote together, North, Finding My Way While Running the Appalachian Trail, came out in hardback last year and just was released in paperback last month, I believe. And I think you're going to do a reissue in hardback as well. So the book must be doing really well.
Yeah, we've had great success with it. We poured a lot into it and have really tried to. It's interesting, people digest books in all kinds of formats nowadays, from electronic to audiobooks, and it's been fun getting to hear from people what they've thought about the book, how it's touched them. And that's really neat, because when you pour so much into a project like that, it's nice to hear that, okay, people are reading it, it's inspiring, it's getting them to do different things, and that kind of just spreads out. So we love that aspect of it. Not the actual writing process, that's another story.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. I got some questions there. And this is your second book, Scott. First book, Eat and Run, came out in 2012, is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
And that was a much different book. I mean, in some ways, it had a different type of personal intimacy and more of your personal story over a number of years, but also kind of had this food component. So it sort of oscillated between personal history and actionable information about nutrition as well. It's really, really exciting read. But this one, much, much different. It sort of documents your experience on the Appalachian Trail. Let's talk a little bit about that experience. I mean, I go back to, I think the last time we sort of shared some trail together was way back in 2013 at the Leadville 100. You were kind of jumping.
Oh yeah, you were there, and we wrote about that. Yeah. That's right. You saw it. You
got to experience it firsthand.
Yeah. So let's talk about what I saw and what you felt. I mean, to me, I had been around you both and around you, Scott, on the race course during some of your absolute highs and some of your lows, and something just didn't feel the same about that experience at Leadville. It just, there was a, I won't describe it. Let you guys describe what was going on at that moment.
Well, I think the biggest thing, I was maybe kind of just in this, I wouldn't say like a funk, but I was in maybe a spot of my career, like trying to sort out, okay, did I want to still race hard for a few more years, accomplish a few more things on like the 100-mile or racing side of the sport? And I guess mentally it was almost like going back a few years earlier when I went back to Western States in 2009.
Right. I remember that as well.
Myself that, oh yeah, I want to go back there and see what I can do. But I'd already been there 7 times, and I'd already done Leadville once before. And I thought, well, it's close to home. We're here in Colorado. We're able to train at altitude. Why not do it? And again, just career wise, I was really in this spot of trying to figure out, should I fully retire, or can I still kind of dabble and still do well? And was it serving me from a career as well as just personal interest? And did did it really pique that interest? And I guess that's where so I was kind of like trying to sort that out. And Leadville was one of those things like, okay, I should try this out. I should try going back to Leadville, see what I can do now that we live here. But Jenny noticed other things with that race.
Yeah. What was your experience, Jenny?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's probably similar to what you noticed, but to me, it was like he just couldn't let it go. It was like he didn't want to do these things anymore. He didn't wake up excited to run and just like go, be in the mountains for 8 hours anymore. He just like he wanted to do other things. He was interested, like he wanted to make food, he wanted to hang out in the house, he wanted to run with me, with Walter, like just casual. And like that's totally fine. So I didn't understand why he was trying to like fake it or go through the motions.
Sure.
Because to me it seemed like he just couldn't let go of like this was his identity. He's used to winning, so maybe just bang out a couple more. But his heart wasn't into it. And as a partner, it's really hard, but it's like a fine line to walk between because I don't want to sound like I don't support him. I'm not, but I also didn't want to just see him kind of putting on this mask, and you saw like in the race, there was like no fight. There was no like oomph, no heart in it. And he always does these things for the love. And I was just like, you don't have to do this. You're kind of putting it on yourself. But I remember seeing you, like you guys came into the May Queen aid station and he was like sitting down, talking to everybody, like drinking soup. And we just kind of like locked eyes and it was like, okay, I guess we're just going to hang out here. But it was disappointing for me and also kind of embarrassing a little bit. But
and I was suffering. I mean, Padre, you know this. I was I'd thrown up a couple times, going over Sugarloaf, and it was just not, I was suffering. And I guess it's easy to go to that spot where I'm like, why am I out here doing this to myself? And I'm like everyone else, even though I've done this for so many years, still get those thoughts. And I wasn't able to like compartmentalize that, push that aside. And like Jenny said, have more fight in me and more drive. And there wasn't as much. I was content with just being like, I'll just finish, top 10, top He's 15, like, I'll just cruise it in,
sure.
Why suffer more than I need to suffer? Not because I wasn't winning. It was just like a fine line. Okay, whether I finish an hour faster or half hour faster, it just didn't really matter anymore. So you had the hard job of like just dealing with somebody that's not as motivated. And I know you've seen me get through some really tough spots and you've been able to like motivate me. And I think that was probably hard. And I felt bad too, because I drag these people out here and get them all psyched and just kind of being like, just kind of kicking myself a little bit and not feeling great.
Well, and what you're sort of describing there is a swirl of emotions, and that's, you get those emotions, but at the same time, like my impression was, whether it was at Western or at Badwater or at the Spartathlon, there was a laser focus, whether or not those other thoughts were creeping in and you were denying them or what, but I wonder about it in the context of your overall life. I mean, you and Jenny were married in 2012 and, building a new life together in Boulder, renovating a home, sort of managing I shouldn't say a new form of celebrity for you. I mean, life is just more complicated. And so, how did that kind of factor in? I know you went up to Leadville a bunch of times and sort of did monk style training, but probably not the same as it was when you would go down to Western 4 weeks in advance and just live out of your van.
Oh, it definitely is different. I mean, I had a lot different demands, even though I was working in my earlier peak years, say of winning Western States or even the Badwater Spartathlon era. So things were a little different. Like my time was demanded of a bit differently, and growing up age-wise and having other commitments, there's a difference there for sure. So maybe the focus wasn't as laser. And I think more than anything, but I don't like to give that as an excuse because I felt like I still could handle all of those things on top of. Maybe I was trying to take on too much.
Well, and I guess
But
I guess
yeah,
what I mean,
yeah,
less logistical complexity in life and more
sure.
like some ease and success and some happiness and
Yeah.
contentment.
And
So
that's true. Yeah. And that's what we write about in North, that
yeah,
life, like I had struggled for a lot of years and I was kind of feeling and like really had to grind. And now I wouldn't say life was easier, but life was, yeah, like, why not enjoy it a little bit more, and
right.
felt like, oh, I could possibly enjoy it more. And having a partner like Jenny, being supported and having fun and just being in a really like good place mentally, just yeah, a lot of things were good. So it was like, okay, kind of enjoying that. And not that I didn't like suffering and going out in the mountains. Like I loved going out in the mountains still, but like how how much do I need to suffer, and
Yeah. Yeah.
do I need to live this more or closer ascetic like lifestyle, like just training, eating and sleeping, running and doing that aspect, on top of like working a job, but not being as like a lot of life energy was going out for sure, whether it was going to appearances, and sure, Born to Run had an impact,
Yep.
the things that I was doing. So yeah, there was maybe some more demands on that life energy, and maybe I wanted to hold on to the life energy that I had. And just going to the mountains and doing 3-4 hour runs was like fun, but did I want to train in the fashion or have that focus of like just winning, and knowing that there was a lot of suffering that was going to occur, like a good suffering, like a really soul searching suffering, but did I need to keep doing that?
Right.
So yeah, that's a tricky spot.
Yeah. And so something, we've talked about it, something wasn't quite right about that. In the subsequent years, you and Jenny went through such difficulties, such challenges trying to build a family. And that's a key part of the story of the book and the motivation for, well, I shouldn't say necessarily the motivation, but part of the story of how the Appalachian Trail idea came to be. I'd love to talk about that. I mean, you know that me and Maggie had our own struggles with trying to start a family, and a lot of people said at the time, the best cure for setbacks, best cure for miscarriages is a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. And I thought a lot of other things could be cures, like beating myself into the ground with running, doing too much work, my dissertation, whatever, distractions. But really, the thing that did it was having a kid. That's later part of your story. But take us to the moment of genesis for the AT idea and kind of what was swirling then.
And it was definitely a motivation. Like Jenny and I were at a spot where, career-wise, there was a lot of things culminating. I waited to do a long trail, a speed record, multi-day, multi-week kind of format for years. And it always piqued my interest more than anything with the sport of ultra running and racing in general. So I knew I wanted to do one. I'd helped people like my buddy Horty, and
Yep.
had been out there before and had read so much about people who had done journey runs, adventure runs, speed records, and knew that was something I wanted to do. But it finally, with having the struggles that we had with raising a family, Jenny, practically dying of a ectopic pregnancy if we hadn't been at home, like there's just some things of like life's short. And so it gave us a little bit more of a nudge of like, let's do this now. And going to the mountains and the woods is a place where we like to process, to heal, to get rejuvenated. And it just felt like good timing. And I'll let Jenny maybe comment on that.
Yeah, Jenny, what were you thinking about this idea?
You guys lived through it too. You know what it's like, just like constant disappointment. Like, I'm a really open person, so all my friends knew what I was going through. And then kind of at the same time, all my friends were getting pregnant, which was great. And I was so happy for everybody. But I needed to just get away from it all. I needed to get away from the hospitals, like the constant like blood tests and like, all these tests of like, what's wrong with me? How come it's not working? Like, we just needed a reset, really, just a mental reset and just kind of an escape. And so when Scott mentioned the Appalachian Trail at first, I was like, not into it, because I'm like, I really knew nothing about it. I didn't know anything about its draw, about the community, about the like mystique of it all. But but then I had an ectopic and then another miscarriage, and I was like, let's go, whatever, let's pack up the van, let's close, lock the doors, and let's
change
get
the
out
scenery.
of here.
Yeah.
And it's not like an escape or something we use. I think it's a really like purposeful retreat, so to speak. And I think those are important. So no matter what people are enduring in their life, I think having those mini retreats or extended retreats, like a month and a half on the Appalachian Trail, those are super powerful. I think in this day and age, it's so easy to be so consumed. And I think that's what the allure was too, because I knew when you're so focused, and when you get back to that question of like, I didn't have maybe the focus for Leadville, but when you're out on the AT, life becomes very distilled. Or when you're on a long trail, or you're out for like a week-long trip out in the wilderness, life becomes very simple, and it gets distilled down to the basics, the things that really matter. And you get into that survival mode so that everything else can kind of melt away. And I think it's a super powerful thing to do. And we often don't take as much time for those pilgrimages or those retreats. And I feel like that's what it was for Jenny and I, versus like, okay, we're just going to run away for a while. It was, we knew what we were doing. It was like a purposeful and intentional, just retreat from everything.
Sure. But within that, you've got this singularity of purpose, right? Just put one foot in front of the other. It's a very elegant kind of production. Yet at the same time, it is a big production. I know you guys, and it's a big part of the story is you sort of on-sited the thing, but the logistical challenges of pulling something like this off. I mean, Jenny, your stories about driving the van and all of those pieces of putting this thing together, that's got to sort of juxtapose interestingly against this simplicity of just one foot in front of the other.
Oh, definitely. And that's what I like when Scott's saying, oh, it was a purposeful retreat. And like, no, it wasn't. Like, it was, I think our intentions were good, but then we were a little bit underprepared. I mean, just, like we'd never done anything like that before. And while Scott he had a pretty solid resume, and I knew mentally he could do it, logistically for me it was a big undertaking. I've crewed at races before, but I've never crewed for 7 weeks straight. I've never crewed, like I've never lived out of my crew vehicle, and just like just really the gravity of every meeting point of not having any way to communicate with each other. It was pretty heavy. It was not like life or death, but I was his support, like his lifeline. So it was kind of stressful, more stressful than I thought it would be.
And there's a lot of pieces. And I think that's where, I mean, having a partner, having a best friend like Jenny to be able to do something like that. I knew she had the makeup for that and she could pull it off, but it's also a little daunting when you think of all the stress put on a relationship and partnership and all that. So we weren't, I guess we thought of it lightly at the time, but there was a ton that had to happen every day, every hour. I had the easier job of just getting from point A to point B and following this trail that is pretty well marked and easy relatively to follow. So my job was easier, but all the pieces that went along with it. And I think that's what, again, it's a huge compliment to Jenny and what she was able to pull off. But I feel like that's, you can plan everything to a T and think you have it, but you have to have somebody like Jenny who is really good on her feet and she's a good problem solver. And that's what you have to do when you're doing something like the AT. You're constantly solving problems and figuring out how to get through situations that no matter how much preparation you do, it's pretty tough. But I think that's what made it so fun too, is there was this newness, this unique experience that was happening every hour, each day. I'd been on the trail, less than 20 miles, continuous. And of the 2,200 miles, I mean, that's a tiny percentage, less than 1%. So it's one of those things that we liked about it too. It was a true adventure.
Sure.
And
I'm thinking about that. One of the big at least to me, the powerful themes of the book. And for those listeners that don't realize, this book is really special in the sense that it's sort of written in narrative form. Scott will lead a chapter, and then Jenny will reflect on her thoughts on that similar period of time on the trail. So it's so neat to kind of see both sides of the narrative. And one of the themes that emerges from that structure is how you both had to think a lot about protecting the other person. You know, Jenny, you were caring for Scott immersively for 7 weeks, personal needs, managing some of the crowd that was starting to get involved, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then Scott, you have some concerns for Jenny's safety and well-being, whether it's a strange person at the trail or just finding her way on these back roads in the middle of the night. A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
This is Sam Schultz, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a little worrisome, but we definitely were always looking out for each other. So, a lot of these things seem like selfish endeavors, but it was a team thing, because without me, he wouldn't be able to do it. And without, he was the reason why we were out there. So I don't know. I didn't really know that there was going to be all these like external factors on him. And I felt bad stressing him out, and I felt bad like complaining. And it was definitely just different, like a whole different experience for me. I mean, you've crewed him at some of the like key iconic races like Badwater, Spread, like how he is. He's just like, I want this and that. Like he's very just like focused, and he's got his systems down. We had no systems. It was like, you're lucky if I have water the next time I see you. Like he definitely had to adjust and adapt. And it was great because we were doing it all on the fly. Like we were making adjustments as we went, learning something new every day. And I do think that's what made it new and fun for him, is it wasn't his regular jam. It wasn't like, this is what I do. This is what I know. It was like, oh, okay, well, we're just like constantly making adjustments the whole time.
And yes, some of that I invited by having a GPS tracker. I mean, these things were meant to be, I guess, another way of keeping a record of things more than anything. Like I knew, some people were going to try and find me or come out. I'd be lying if I didn't know. Like, yes, some people are going to come out because of that, but in general, it was meant so we had a record of things, and it was
sure.
Each thing was strategic. But we didn't think it was going to be as crazy where there's 20 people, 30 people showing up at trailheads, and it definitely created a different stress, probably more so for Jenny, and it did take away life energy, but also brought so much to us in ways that we maybe weren't always at the time, I guess, acknowledging or as appreciative for. But it really created a really fun environment to be around. There was an energy happening. So there was an energy exchange and stress exchange back and forth of
sure.
people, coming in and wanting to be involved and wanting a piece of the action. And it was great because I got introduced to some people that are great friends and people that, we just couldn't have done things without. Close friends like Speed Goat or Horty, but then complete strangers. And it definitely added this dynamic where there was a lot of trust occurring. And I think that's where Jenny and I were tested so much, was on that trust and just making sure, okay, she's going to be able to do what she needs to do. I'm going to be able to handle the loads that I'm handling. And in between, hopefully everything comes together. But it was a huge display of trust on all levels, and then trusting strangers and letting people into our lives and what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, it's not normal that an athlete or an artist or somebody who's performing at work just invites strangers in and like, oh yeah, come and shadow me or come and hang out. So, but it was also cool. It was a lot of fun, and we can joke and say it's a lot of fun, but at the time it was probably more stress, especially on Jenny.
Well, I think you both go into that so eloquently in the book, the range of emotions from, seeing a stranger on the trail and sort of, uttering a curse, Scott, and then sort of feeling guilty about it down the road. And then at the same time, meeting strangers that have sort of invited themselves into your crew and having them be key parts of helping you get through some of the crux days.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah. So there was that. And I think that's what I tried to always tell people, like, okay, you're going to get a range, like, more than welcome to join me. But, I would tell people sometimes, like, okay, I need a mile by myself, or I'm not going to really talk a whole lot right now. I've had a rough, day or rough night. And it was really just never knew what was going to happen. And that's why we were out there. I mean, we were out there to like test that adaptability, and maybe more ways than one. And instead of controlling it, we just kind of we just opened the genie out of the bottle and just like let everything kind of just swirl around us, which, again, for somebody like Jenny, who's managing so many strategic and organizational duties, that's really hard to manage. Whereas I could just, I don't know, keep people excited and happy to be out on the trail joining me, and keep that momentum going, and hopefully, draw off of some of that as well. But it was really cool. We couldn't have like planned it. Like everyone assumes
Sure.
like we orchestrated this big event out on the Appalachian Trail, where it was not meant to be that way. It just kind of
big event where it comes down to the last, hours and minutes.
And it's gonna, everyone knows the outcome for the most part. Some of your listeners might, and if they haven't, they'll probably, when they pick up the book, realize that I did break the record. But it was wild how it all unfolded, and there were so many times that myself and Jenny were like, "This is stupid," or "Oh, I can't do this anymore. It's over." I mean, from the beginning, in the first week, just so many obstacles were placed in the way, and trying to get through those. And I think that's where the experience came through. And instead of trying to rehearse everything, we relied on that experience and that steadfastness and that drive and that just survival, that instinct that we have.
Sure. That's interesting, talking about the feelings of I can't do this anymore and all that. That's one of the more, I think, poignant moments in the book where you experience, and your writing on this was so compelling, you experienced some deep disappointment when it occurred to you that you had miscounted the days and that the record was still possible. Oh, I still have a chance, and that actually sucks.
Exactly.
Totally.
It's not over yet.
He was like, we're gonna walk it in. I effed up. Like, it's not possible. Let's just back. He was like, we'll get to Katahdin, but let's just backpack. Like, take 12 days. And me and I was with our friend Timmy O'Neill at the time. We were like, what the F are you talking about, dude? Like, we did not just bust our butts for the last 6 weeks to see you walk it in. And it was Leadville all over again for me. I was like, no. Mm-mm. But this time I was like, I was so invested. Everybody was so invested. I was like, nope, we're not. You're not going to just sit around here and walk it in. So, but then, I think once he realized that he did the math wrong, I think a little bit of fire came back and just a little bit of like hardening up. And he really, then after that, I mean, things were pretty dark then, but things got really dark after that. Like, he went to places I'd never thought possible, and I didn't know if he'd come back from those places. Like, it was grim. But
I mean, already for the previous week and a half, I was getting, if I was lucky, like a 4-hour night of sleep would be big. Maybe there was a 5-hour occasion, but for the most part, I was averaging 2-3 hours of sleep continuous. And it just, I was brought, to the brink. And then I already had these emotions of like, oh, it's gone. Like, I had to come to terms with that. So I had, these miles on the trail before I saw Jenny, and we figured out things that, no, we've miscalculated. And, it's actually the 47th day that counts. That's still, 46 days and whatever. Like, there's just so many things to then have to like retool my mental outlook and say like, okay, let's go get it. That wasn't going to happen like immediately. So what Jenny's talking about, like for me, I had to like, oh, I just convinced myself that I spent the past 4.5 weeks, almost 5 weeks of just not breaking the record. And now you're telling me I have a chance. That's great. But I've convinced myself that, okay, I can still make it to Katahdin and still be worth it, and just instead of like hang it up. So it was a real like difficult spot. And I think that's a hard spot to be in. And knowing like, okay, I'm going to have to dig even deeper. It was looking back on it, was really amazing, but it was also just so difficult. Like I can't even put it in words. I try to do that in North, but it's hard to write about stuff where you're like, oh, how do you get yourself out the door again when you've just been inflicting so much? And I don't want to say suffering. I mean, it's just really tough work physically, mentally, and then be able to turn around and do that again and again and again and say, oh, it's actually going to get a lot harder right now, or it's going to be harder because now there's only so many hours of each day and so many minutes, and you only have so many minutes and hours for the record.
Yeah, it's like that stress was allowed. You were allowed to relieve yourself of the stress and the weight for a moment.
For a little bit.
It's like, God damn it, I got to put this big backpack back on and carry it up the hill. Let's talk. I mean, speaking of difficulty, you mentioned.
By the way, you're going to do that with strangers. I mean,
yeah, totally.
My best friends were like leaving, had to leave. They couldn't stay any longer. All of a sudden now it was, some strangers that Jenny found from a local running club, the Maine Monsters, Trail Monsters. And they were amazing, but like, gosh, that like really just
kind of messed with him. It definitely messed with him.
Sure. Yeah.
But
so let's talk about the writing of the book. At what point was Raven born in the writing process?
I was pregnant when we got a book deal.
Okay.
And then, we wrote the whole proposal while I was pregnant. And then she was born.
She was born right in the middle of it, basically.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
We were in the thick of it, like writing the first draft.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Exactly. So
new parents, like first time parents, being like,
Although to be clear, I feel like based on your struggles, any timing was perfect timing to have a child enter your life, right?
Oh yeah. We were
welcoming it for sure,
excited, and so kind of like the last thing we wanted to do was write, like sit in front of a computer. But it was tough because we basically wrote the whole book with a newborn to 1.5-year-old.
Yeah.
State.
And what was your process like? Because the book is the narrative is so detailed, but I can't imagine that either of you had any time or capacity to do any journaling while on the trail.
I'm so glad that you can realize that, because a lot of people are like, so you guys took notes? Did you do like voice recording instead of like what kind of journaling? But there's zero time.
No, it's go or sleep.
And especially I'm driving 3 hours for each 10 miles he's covering. Like there's no time. And I wish that we did. Like I wish we wrote down a lot of the through hikers and people have like great trail names, and that's what I regret the most, is not getting everybody's trail name down. But for me, I have a good memory, and we took a lot of pictures on our phone, and then I had a guidebook and the maps, and I would circle on the maps and in the guidebooks, like this is where I stopped, here, and then we finished on this day at this time, and those would kind of jog my memory, and sure. I can still like open the guidebook and look at the spots, and I can visualize where it was. So that was like my memory process. But then, Scott, I think everything was just so fresh and real. It's not like writing Eat and Run where he's talking about his youth and childhood. This was still like really like fresh in our minds.
Even though it was a couple of years later. And I think yeah, I remember David Horty was like on me like, oh, when you get home after, you drive back with the AT, he's like, you got to start writing down things right now. Like you got to write down stuff. And I was just like, that was the last thing I wanted to do is like relive.
Yeah, totally.
Even though it was so awesome, like it was amazing. Like I'm not saying like, oh, it was pure misery out there, but like the last thing you want to do when you do something like that is like, oh, I want to go right back to those places and write everything. Like we would reminisce about little pieces, and like there was always a day or two or multiple times throughout the day where you like want to like relive stuff and recall things. Jenny and I would just, oh man, remember this, and somebody remind us. But when you're actually writing things, that's a different story. So that was the last thing. So we didn't take good notes, didn't write things when we got home. But I think in the end it helped, because if we had this huge amount of information, or if we had somebody taking notes while we were out there and like tabulated all this stuff, we would have had to go through all of that. Whereas Jenny and I, in writing the book and doing a split voice where there's two voices, I mean, that's the other thing that we complicated things with the whole writing process, because our editor was like, oh, I think there's a easier way or better way to do this. And we were pretty dead set on like having our voices intertwined throughout the book.
Okay.
And that was difficult. So I think what helped is that we didn't have too much information. We didn't have like this huge journal and all this information to edit through. We actually just could recall like, what are the most important things? Mm-hmm. What were the things that were so visceral, so raw and emotional that, again, like Jenny said, we could put ourselves back there. And I feel like that's just the way we think, maybe more than other people. But for us, it wasn't these numbers we had to memorize, because Jenny had strategically wrote stuff down on a data book just because she had to know when she had to be at the next spot. And she wrote down when I got in every night because, oh, well, you got a few hours of sleep here or there. And that was helpful. But the actual emotional stuff, that came back. And it was really cool. It was really cathartic. And I think that was like a lot of fun. That was the fun part of the writing experience, but trying to get the words right and enough words.
And taking care of Raven. Like we didn't have any childcare. We don't have family who lives here. So we would take shifts. Like I would write in the morning because that's kind of like my witching hour. And then he's more of a night person. So I'd work in the morning, come home for lunch, then he would go. And then when Raven went to sleep, we would stay up like all night. It was kind of, a lot of parallels to the AT of like sleepless nights, like teamwork. But we would trade writing a book together with being on the AT like in a heartbeat.
And were you
give me the AT or give me 3 ATs? Like I'd rather do 6,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail.
In the winter.
And were you guys reading each other's work as you went, or keeping it from each other? Like what, or were you chronologically synced up on what portions of the narrative you were working on?
Oh no, we would definitely, like, I'd come back and I'd be like, I'd hand it over and he'd read it. And then it was constantly in real time, just like, because it was so tricky. I didn't want to write about what he just wrote about verbatim. I had to read what he was talking about, and then that would conjure up all my feelings and my perspective. And then I would fill in my blanks,
Yeah.
So we definitely had to write together.
And strategically, and that was hard because Jenny would have these ideas, or I'd have these ideas, and I would have to really think, okay, how am I going to end? Because my parts were longer, and I had to like make sure, I wasn't taking away from what Jenny wanted to say, and when was it going to come in chronologically best, so we didn't like have too much overlap, and it was really tricky. And then I'd come home, after Jenny had like a great writing session, be like, oh, I banged out a chapter. And I was like, what? You banged out a chapter? And then I'd come home with like 2.5 pages. And she's like, what? You were gone for 4 hours and you got 2.5 pages? This is like when you're like crunch mode of like second draft, not just, the first time around when you don't have as like hard deadlines looming over you. This is like second draft, almost third draft stuff where there wasn't any extra time to do a whole lot. So every minute counted, but at the same time, you're trying to do creative work that just takes tons of time. So yeah, it was grueling, but amazing once it's done.
Sure. Yeah. And, I don't want to necessarily speak for all readers, but I will. And thank you for the courage to stand up to your editor and say, this is, how we want to do this, because I think the book is better, not just because it has both your voices against each other, but I think those voices complement each other in real time when you're reading it in a really powerful way. So well done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, writing something personal, like we had 3 drafts, and every draft I was just like, this is not good enough, because it went from kind of like, when you first write it, it went from more like a blog report, trip report, play by play. And really that's boring. Like I was really just dead set on getting to the heart of everything,
Yeah.
like being super honest, because I feel like it was such a personal trip for us. I wanted to be honest, and I wanted to capture like how we felt in those moments. And so now, I feel bad because I'm like, oh, did I complain too much? But that's really how it was in the moment. Um, and I'm glad that you appreciate it and that you liked both perspectives.
For sure. I want to be sensitive of your time. Jenny, I know you got to go pick up Evergreen. Yeah. But before you split, I want to just pivot and give you guys a chance to talk about some of the choices you've made with not attaching yourself with, but doing things to support various causes. Jenny, you've done a lot of work with this Every Mom Counts group. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about that and how you came to that group and what it's about, and how people can maybe learn more about it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we work a lot with Every Mother Counts, and it came like I follow Christy Turlington on Instagram, and because she's a runner and she's a mom and she's super passionate, and my friends who are also moms are like, oh, you gotta follow her. And not really knowing her backstory or why she started this organization. But then, she had her baby and everything was fine. And then she started hemorrhaging and she lost a lot of blood, and she was just like, whoa, here I am, at the best hospitals, and something really bad could have happened to me. And that happens around the world to these women who are in clinics, like without like power. And, a lot of women who need help when they're pregnant or delivering, they have to walk these distances, like 42K, like just to get basic care. And these are distances that we run for fun, as a hobby, and so she kind of made the parallel. And so now they raise money through these big iconic races like New York and Big Sur. And then they go around the world and they try to help improve maternal health care to all over, just and also domestically too. But it just really is so personal to me, because I had an ectopic pregnancy and I didn't know it, and I was internally bleeding, and if I had to walk 5K even to get help, something bad could have happened to me. But instead we lived like 2 miles away from an ER at the time. And so it is a very personal organization, and I love the work they do. We went to Tanzania with them, and we visited a lot of hospitals, and we installed like solar care. And it's just, for me too, as a new mom, I'm not super motivated to run, but having this, running for them, it definitely gets me out the door and gets me excited to do races again. So it's a nice motivator for me, but also I really believe and feel passionate about the work they do.
Fantastic.
And thanks to Jenny, like I've gotten involved. I feel like there's done a lot of work with Christy, and she's been just great to see, like somebody who's at her point in her modeling career. And there's some parallels there. She's a few years older than me, but it's pretty neat to see like she's funneled the energy and drive into something she feels strongly about, and somebody who's a relatively new runner in the past 5-6 years. It's been fun to do. And getting men involved in a maternal health organization, nonprofit, is not the easiest thing to do. There's a lot of other nonprofit work, and I'm an equal opportunist when it comes to nonprofit work. I've worked with the Nature Conservancy, the Himalayan Cataract Project, a bunch of different organizations that I feel various visually impaired groups like Team with Vision, and there's just a lot of stuff I've been doing. So I've like been bouncing around, but Every Mother Counts is so much. It's such a, I guess, personal connection for Jenny and I, because we've experienced it firsthand, and often it is a lot of women that can relate. And I feel like we need more men who are involved in organizations that improve the quality and health of lives of women in a lot of spaces. And this is just one way, because we wouldn't be here without mothers. So it's been really good, and trying to get more men involved, because it's one of those things. Again, it's not always the I don't know, the coolest thing from a male standpoint, like, oh, you're involved in maternal health, but it's so important that we get more people involved. It's not just a female thing.
And it probably
something
takes,
we all benefit from.
Yeah, and it probably takes a level of vulnerability that a lot of guys just aren't. They don't feel like they can open themselves up to that. Speaking of, all the different sort of competing demands on your time, on both your time, but Scott, I'm sure you get asked to attach your name to a bunch of different things at this stage of your career. You've built a platform, and now you can, speak out on a variety of issues that you think are important. How do you make choices about where you allocate your time and your effort and your platform?
It's a tricky thing, because sometimes for me, I didn't really plan to have this platform or think that, I was going to do this. So sometimes it is a little hard for me to feel like, I have this responsibility. But because I'm the person that I am, like, just at a soul level, I feel like, this is my duty. This is an opportunity. This would be wasted if I didn't do things. It's what I've always done, because I felt like giving up my time and energy to help other people get inspired that all pays off. I feel like if the more people we can get out doing positive things, that's going to rub off on other people, and the positivity just extends. So it is hard when I pick groups to work with or products to endorse. It's a pretty rigorous process. For like, Jenny has been helpful too, like getting another set of eyes and having individuals like just really make sure it's the right fit is important. And then when it comes to nonprofit work, it's stuff where I feel like, okay, I can really get behind this. Having a mother who had multiple sclerosis, like, I'm always like, should I just be working in that kind of arena with multiple sclerosis and one disease? But I felt like I've really wanted to like open things up, so a little bit more broader. And I do a lot of work for the plant-based community and health and wellness and nutrition, which is something that I'm really passionate about. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that to me is like one of the things that it's been a part of my brand, but it's also something I feel really strongly with. So I think having the ability to connect it to who I am as an individual and what's personal to me, but also what I've stood for a number of years, not just, this sounds like a good idea because this is really important. Like, I mean, I was interesting. I was in Bulgaria a few weeks ago, speaking there and presenting my book that was North was just being published into Bulgarian. And somebody in the audience asked the first question. It was an older gentleman in his like 60s saying, like, we have these amazing old growth forests, and they're being, cut down in Bulgaria here, and it's the last remaining, tree of this species. And, what can you do to like help this situation? Mm-hmm. And it was one of those things where I'm sure people are like, okay, this guy went on for minutes, railing, not on me, but just being like, hey, you should be doing more as somebody who can have an effect. And he was right. Like, we could do more. So I'm always like, I should be doing more with climate change or something that's really impending. And I always feel like I've just got to make sure that they're the things
that you love.
Yeah, that I love. And I feel like with diet and nutrition, I mean, something that we do every 3 times a day, 4 times a day is putting food in our mouth. And that's one of the biggest impacts we can have personally, beyond obviously all the civic duties that we have or things that we could be doing at the governmental level for climate change. But it's a huge thing when it comes to something that we have power over, what we buy and what we put into our bodies from a food standpoint. So yeah, it's finding the things like, how can I affect change in certain arenas with the right group? And I haven't started a nonprofit. that sounds a little daunting to me. So like I said, I've spread myself over a bunch of different organizations or things that I want to get involved with. And when I can tie in running, it's great. Like guiding visually impaired runners has been something. My mother was gradually losing her sight with MS, and there's somewhat of a personal connection, but it's also one of those things where it's really, I don't know, there's something that I get out of that experience that's unique to me and really enriching. So I feel like that's super powerful. So I guess finding the things that, yes, you feel strongly about or that you're personally connected to, but you've got to enjoy the work too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we also work with this organization, Back on My Feet, that it's like getting homeless people, getting them into running and getting them, like, running just gives so much, like self-confidence, so much like empowerment to people. So Scott's really good at choosing organizations that really build people up.
Well, I'm glad you both chose to allocate some of your scarce and precious time to talking with me on this podcast. The book, North, Finding My Way While Running the Appalachian Trail, is fantastic. It's available in paperback, and it's going to be another release in hardback as well, so you can get hardback copies. Jenny, Scott, thanks so much for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can entice you to come back to Missoula sometime soon. I mean, you packed the Wilma Theater last time you were here. That theater's been renovated, and the town would love to have you back sometime.
I'd love to bring the kids there. It'd be so fun to get all of our kids together too.
Yeah, it's a fun place. Yeah, we really enjoyed every time we come through Missoula. So let's
make it happen. Let's
make a north stop happen. And Jenny and I read the audio book. So for people who are runners or people who are outside doing things, or
if you don't mind our voices, listen to it.
Any book, of course. So yeah, you can catch it in all formats. But it's always fun to be able to share stories, and getting out to Montana is something. We got up to Bozeman last summer, right at the tail end.
I know. I didn't even know you were coming. I would have. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother story.
Oh yeah. Well, it was great talking to you because you've lived so much of Scott's previous life. Like you have a different perspective. So it was good to hear your insights too.
You've been in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And you've seen me at different stages. So I think it's fun to have that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot, Padre's seen me at so many. So yeah, I know you were busy with your own stuff. So not everybody could come out. I mean, that's one thing as you get, as people get, busier lives or just our lives of different, it's hard to get everyone together.
Yeah.
So we couldn't get the Padre band back out on the AT, but I was like, wow, like you've seen a lot of stuff throughout the years and helped me at races and been there and seen me for just different phases. So it's funny. So you had to read about it, unfortunately, instead of coming out, but it's always fun to catch up.
Yeah,
Next
absolutely.
time.
Well, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much for spending time with us, and congrats on the book and all your success. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. The book is fantastic. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. Okay. Coming up next week, we have another old friend, independent filmmaker Eric Becker, the writer and director of the amazing documentary film Return to Mount Kennedy. Check it out next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, part of the Michelle and Lauren Hansen Media Lab at the University of Montana College of Business. Remember that this podcast was supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you'd ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Executive producer, Stefan Borsum. Producer, Aidan Morton. And interns, Aspen Runkle, Max Gibson, and Ellie Hanasek. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot. See you next time.